We're going to bring on Thomas Christopher, owner of the League Winners. And Thomas, we appreciate you coming on. We were going to start with just the spring game in general and your observations. We have to start, though, with Trevor Pena and the news today that he's entered the portal. Your thoughts on hearing the news that SU's best receiver, arguably its best receiver, is heading out?
Yeah, it's got to be a little bit shocking, especially to Syracuse fans, right? I don't think too many people expected Pena to really enter the portal. He's expected to be, a leader on that Fran Brown offensive you guys have been alluding to. And it has to hit people, as a shock value, right? But I kind of think at the same time with the NIL and the way things are kind of breaking down and the roster size is about to dwindle, we're about to see a lot of weird stuff happening in college football that might not, settle in well for the fans.
Yeah, and let's keep in mind it could be the last unregulated transfer portal. The House settlement's still out there, but It is lawless at the moment, and I think you're going to see a lot of money being thrown around, especially over the course of the next couple of weeks. All right, so with Pena heading out, go ahead.
I was going to ask you, how. There's people in the chat that think this is the end of the world. There's people that think it's not a big deal. How easy is it to replace someone like Trevor Pena for Syracuse?
So I think from a leadership perspective, it's always hard, right? He's the veteran in the locker room. He's been there. He's helped build the program up. He's been part of the, Fran Brown's first year, and kind of, is the leader. It's always hard to replace leaders, especially when you have a wide receiver group that is pretty young. But from a production standpoint, it kind of depends, man. There's a lot of people that I do really like. Darius Johnson is one guy that I really do like, and I think, the true freshman could potentially step into that role. But it remains to be seen right now.
All right, so that's where I was going next. I was going to ask you about possible replacements. You bring up Darius Johnson. Who else, I guess, stood out to you during the spring game and from a wide receiver perspective, and guys that you're going to have your eye on going into the fall of 2025 here?
Yeah, I mentioned Darius Johnson. I think he's a really good slot guy. He really understands how to gain leverage in and out of his stems to create separation. He's got pretty strong hands as well. Jalen Hornsby, he looked fantastic in the spring game. Primarily against Demetrius Samuel, he actually looked really good. He put up a lot of incredible catches. Emmanuel Ross, another freshman, he looked really good as well. And, Justice Ross Simmons, I think, also performed pretty well. I think despite, a lot of questions with Jackson Meeks, and Aronde leaving and now the issue with Pena, I think there's a lot of questions about this group going in. But I think the young core really has a lot of potential. And that doesn't even include Samuel playing the other side of the ball once he gets more developed.
All right, so you were at the spring game. Thomas, what I guess, give us your observations. What stood out to you in general?
Yeah, I think Jakari Williams looked good for the quarterback too. Samuel, he struggled a little bit, but on defense, as I mentioned, Jalen Hornsby was kind of the person he was going against throughout most of the practice session. But with that being said, Samuel he did a lot of good things technically in terms of his hip fluidity and, just his press coverage in general. So I'm not too worried about that. Offensively, I'd like to see him, develop a little bit more. On the defensive side of the ball, Murad Watson, King Joseph, Edwards, Nathan Nyandoro, they looked really good on the defensive line. It kind of brings some questions as to how strong and how formidable the offensive line is, but that's a discussion for another time, perhaps.
You look at the roster right now compared to where it was last year, and I think last year there were a lot of known commodities, right? I mean, SU fans knew about Justin Barron and Marlo Wax and LaQuinn Allen and Trevor Pena and Aronde Gadsden and Kyle McCord, and, all those guys are gone. But we've also seen that, Fran Brown has done a great job in the portal, done a great job with, recruiting high school seniors and bringing in freshmen. We know the schedule is really tough, but I guess my question to you, Thomas, is from a talent perspective, how does this year's roster, where it stands right now, compare to last year's? Is it comparable? Is it a little better? Is it a little bit behind where they were last year?
I think it would have helped to see, Ricky play in the spring game. Obviously, it's just a spring game, but you always like to see a guy get in, that simulated game action in front of fans where there's just a little bit more pressure. I think offensively, it takes a little bit of a step back, because replicating what McCord did and Aronde and Jackson and all those guys did, that's going to be difficult. On the defensive side of the ball, I think there's potential for them to play at a similar level. especially on the back end. I think Samuel is going to develop into a very fine talent. You have the Kerr brothers, who I think will also be able to put up good numbers defensively. And then you have Chestnut as well, who, solid veteran presence in the room. So I think that while it may potentially be a slight step downwards, a lot remains to be seen. We're very early in the process, but with how young the roster is, I think the sky is genuinely, the limit here.
We haven't talked a lot about the defense here. As you look at that side of the ball, what's your biggest concern on defense for Syracuse at this point?
Yeah, my biggest concern is honestly the front seven. It's stopping the run, it's generating a pass rush, and then it's coverage on the back end and the linebacker group. We don't know who's going to take over for the Fidel Diggs role, the Marlon Wax role. And Justin Barron, as you guys mentioned, he played that kind of tweener, hybrid role, and we don't necessarily have somebody there yet either. So those are kind of my concerns. But if they can't get to the pass, if they can't get to the quarterback, it's going to be really hard for them to succeed defensively.
Do you have any thoughts on, we know Syracuse opens up with Tennessee, and you know what they're going through right now with, their quarterback hitting the portal after he was told, you're not getting $4 million from us. What do you make of that situation?
It's interesting because, talking with a lot of college players, they get some guys get really bad advice, and whether that it's, their parent or NIL agents, who I think a lot of NIL agents are fairly predatory towards players. Some players just don't know any better. And there's rumors going around that him and, a couple other players were potentially thinking about holding out during the playoffs as well. I think with the way that things are kind of like in this wild, wild west stage of college football, that we may see similar stories like this pan out. Personally, I'm a little bit of an old school guy. I believe in teamwork. I believe in, building culture and presence. And when you're the quarterback and you're doing these kind of things, it doesn't necessarily speak favorably, and it's not something that I honestly agree with.
Yeah, you're right. There are reports out there that Tennessee's been dealing with this going back to last season, that he had threatened to sit out the college football playoff unless they paid him more money.
Yeah.
And, it sounds like this latest, sitting out the spring game, or, missing practice right before the spring game, sounds like that was the last straw, certainly for Tennessee. All right, great stuff, Thomas. We appreciate you coming on. Remind people how they can consume your content. Where can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. You guys can find me on Twitter at ThomasCP_NFL. And you can find my content on Instagram at The League Winners or theleaguewinners.com, where we cover college football.
All right. Great stuff, Thomas. Thanks for coming on. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks. I appreciate you guys. You take care.
All right, you as well. We'll take a timeout here. Phone lines open the rest of hour number one. If you want to chime in on this Trevor Pena situation, 315-437-7644. We've got Rick Beardsley coming up at 1 o'clock. Ton Thomas, 1:30. Back after this on ESPN Radio.